Ruby's Pop-Up Peep Show believes that people are pleasure. Ruby Entertainments is your go-to sexy party people for birthdays, bachelor or bachelorette parties on Vancouver Island, home of Ruby's Pop-Up Peep Show, the world's first traveling peep show. Plan your next destination celebration in Victoria, BC, where we take the fuss out of fabulous. Established since 2008, Ruby's carefully curated team of party professionals know how to put your guests at ease with ease. Effortlessly effervescent, we are proud to say that referrals and repeat business are our bread and butter. Offering dazzling performances from mild to wild, we provide everything from burlesque to strippergrams, girl-on-girl duos, and the wonderfully wet and wild Babes in Toyland. Book your next event and include Ruby's Pop-Up Peep Show. That's right, you can add on our mobile peep show, showcasing performers in a sexy circus-style caravan that comes to you. Check out www.rubyentertainments.com and our Instagram @RubyPeepShow and paint the town Ruby today.
Welcome back to another episode of Stripped by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. I am your host, Sia, aka Kimchi, on stage. You could actually find me on stage next week. Yay! Finally, I am back to working at the club. I will be at Whiskey Richards on the 28th and March 2nd. If you want to catch me there, you cannot buy dances there because it is a strange situation. It's actually not a strip club, but they're trying to make a strip club-esque situation happen there. But you can buy some merch for me, come hang out and chill with me in my civilian clothes because that's what we're allowed to do. Other than that, in addition to being a dancer, I am also a digital content creator, so you could subscribe to my links if you could find them. I also am a cam model on Streamate, and I was a sugar baby for many years, over 10 years ago, and that's kind of how I started in the industry. If you are listening to the show and you or it's your first time here and you're like, what is this all about? Strip by Sia is all about destigmatizing sex work, and I do that through the power of education and telling people's stories, specifically those who are in the industry. So I bring on different guests every single week to talk about their corner or their niche in the industry. And whether they are talent, they're like on screen, behind the scenes, they're maybe a nonprofit organization that helps benefit sex workers. I really try to bring on a vast number and variety of guests just to properly illustrate what it really is like to like live like a day in the life in our shoes. So if you made it this far, which is like 1 minute in, yay, please continue to listen. We have a fantastic guest on today who I'll be introducing shortly. We will be talking about the fictional media representation of sex workers and how that may have evolved over the years. I think it has, but I'm sure that she will have lots of opinions for us today. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to say hello and thank you to all the lovely Patreon subscribers. Thank you so much. If you don't know, I do have a Patreon, just because people are like, where can I send donations? Your podcast is lovely and it's a really great resource and blah, blah, blah. Like I used it to help me get into the industry and prepare myself and whatnot. So I started Patreon so it could help fund the show in terms of funding my website, in terms of hosting. It can also help me go to industry-related events across America. So that has been great. You can visit and subscribe if you're inclined to do so, starting at $4 a month at patreon.com/stripbysia. And members do get some exclusive features, including bonus episodes that are never heard before, never released to the public, including a lot of my guest lectures, keynote speeches, and some other behind-the-scenes stuff like that. So me at the AVNs or me at XBiz and stuff like that. So it is kind of fun. So you could check it out. And also, if you are on the top tier, you also get a little band recognition shout out. So I'm just going to go ahead and list those people out because there are a bunch of you here. So I just want to say hello to Red Door Products, Dan from Seattle. Also, it's so nice to meet you finally in person, Dan. So lovely. We also have McKenna King from Edmonton, Canada. B. York, also from Seattle. We've got Eric Arajo, We got Moxie Mayhem, Selena Money, Geyser, Justin Erickson from Vancouver, Washington, and Snoo Snoo all the way from Germany. So thank you guys so much for your support. Some of you have been here since day one, which has been awesome and truly mind-blowing and humbling. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Other than that, we're just going to jump right into the things. And also, if you are a longtime listener and you haven't liked and rated and reviewed the show, now is probably a good time. You can do that on Apple or Spotify. I do read all the reviews, whether good or bad. But it really helps other folks find the show as well in terms of discoverability. So please do that right now. But yeah, as I mentioned, I would love to bring on our lovely guest today. She goes by the name Katarina Quinn, and she is a New York City-based full-service sex worker, also a writer, and is also the contributor to the Petit Mort Magazine as their media writer. So I would love to give her a warm welcome. So hello, Katarina, are you there? I am good. As you might know, before we started recording, you'll know that I'm still sick, but I am doing okay. I'm doing all right, and I hope you're doing okay as well. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to chat with me today. Yeah, I'm super stoked. I mean, I know a little bit about you from what I saw on your website, your Twitter/X, but I also really think it's important for myself to give space to all of my guests. So I usually throw the mic back to all of my guests so they can give themselves their own kind of introduction for anything that I might have missed, or maybe some things I can't find on the internet. But yeah, I'm going to throw it back to you. So please tell us who you are in your own words and terms.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest, came out to New York for school, also spent quite a few years as a sugar baby before I took on this name and form. Um, Excited to be writing with Petit Mort, and I obviously do a lot of thinking and writing about representation, specifically of sex workers in fictional media. Um, and I also do think that the representation has been improving lately, so it's good to see.
Yeah, no, totally. And I haven't done an episode like this in a long time. And even the episodes I have done, I just did some bonus episodes on P Valley, Hustlers, stuff in journalism and stuff as well. So it's really great to kind of revisit this topic in a completely different angle. And I'm really excited to have some fun in our conversation today over the next hour. But before we kind of get into the meat and bones of the episode, I want to introduce the audience to Katarina Quinn as well. So I know a lot of people are always interested on people's origin stories or how they got into the industry. So if you don't mind sharing, I'd love for you to go into that if you'd like.
Yeah, I did work in media for a time during and post college. Quit one of those jobs at around the same time that I broke up with my college boyfriend, and knew a few people who were sugar babies. Had to pay the rent while I figured out what to do, and just kind of fell into it, and ended up, enjoying having the free time to work on my own writing and kind of figure out my life as someone in their mid-20s. And so here I still am.
There you go. And you mentioned you're also a sugar baby too. Was that your entry point into the industry?
Yeah, good
Oh
old
my
seeking
gosh.
arrangement.
Oh my gosh, I'm traumatized by that place. Good old seeking arrangement. I hope it was hopefully better in New York City rather than Vancouver. So I
I,
feel like it would be.
I think probably better paid,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least.
Oh my God. Don't even talk to me about that.
Yeah,
Oh.
but it is like people think that escorting is going to be like such a crazy experience, but so many crazier things happened to me when
As a
I
sugar
was
baby.
sugaring that than in this current iteration of my life. So
Right? Oh my God. That place was crazy seeking arrangement
Ooh.
days. Like, I haven't done an episode on sugaring just because I feel like I have very strong opinions, and I'm just like, one day I'll do it. Like, one day I will make an episode on that, but
We're all traumatized by it.
like, I mean, for your experience, like, did you like even have the maturity level in terms of like actually viewing it as work? Because I know coming from experience, like I did not. I was like, nope. I had like this whole horophobia thing back in the day, and it was like,
Mm.
no, I'm not a prostitute, or I'm not this. I'm a sugar baby, and that's different. And I'm like, girl.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I started, um, I did kind of have this thing where I was like, well, I was going on all of these bad Tinder dates, and now I
Hmm.
just go on bad dates that also pay my rent.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I knew people who were in the industry in various ways when I started doing it, so I didn't start out with that kind of internalized whorephobia.
Good.
Kind of knew what it was from the start. So
That's good.
that's
I'm glad.
lucky.
I'm glad to hear that. That is lucky because, like, oh my gosh, it was a journey. I'll say that.
Mm.
And before we move on to other topics, how did you kind of transition in from sugaring to independent escorting?
Um, so through my life sugaring, I knew like a couple people who graduated, um, and we're always going on about better quality of clients, like
Mm-hmm. Better
better
pay.
better pay, yeah. And I think it does kind of translate to something about your internal sense of self-worth. Like on seeking arrangements, these men are trying to pay you as little as possible, constantly trying to bargain with you, not giving you what you want. And the fact that with this it's just no questions, no bargains, either you pay it or you don't. um I think that has uh, that difference, I think, really does kind of affect how you relate your self-worth to the job.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm hoping, like, for those who are listening, hopefully you do get to a point where you do realize your self-worth, no matter like where you are in this career. I hope it's sooner rather than later, because could be lots of time that's lost, money also that's also lost, and you yourself can kind of get lost in this industry as well. So um it's hard when you kind of don't have that, or don't have that kind of self value for yourself too. So yeah, I mean, other than that, in addition to your sex work, you're also a writer as well. How did you get into that? Was that something that you studied in school as well, or?
No, I wrote my first short story when I was, I think, 8 years old. So I have a novel knocking around in my computer, a TV pilot that's actually about sex work. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, it's just something I've been doing my whole life. I've always been a big reader too, so storytelling, I think, is really important to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess, like, with both this kind of quote unquote vanilla work and also like your spicy work in terms of sex work, it's really cool to see those two worlds kind of colliding and merging together, which we will definitely be talking about shortly as well. So I know that you've come forward this for this day talking about a few specific I guess media, like movies and shows that have been very, very popular, including like Sex and the City. We have The Menu that was super popular, White Lotus, and most recently, Poor Things. So I don't know where you want to get started with that, or something,
Yeah.
maybe a brief overview or something, however you want to take it.
Yeah. Well, so these are the things I've specifically written about that you can find on Petit Mort's blog. Um, and I do think that recently representation has been getting a lot better. If you go back to something like Sex and the City and look at the way sex workers are represented, it's either an episode where Samantha is like yelling profanity at the trans sex workers who are outside of her apartment, or it's Carrie being absolutely horrified when a man leaves her $1,000 on the
I remember
hotel
that.
nightstand. She's very happy to order room service on his bill, but if she's if she thinks that he thinks she's a whore, quote unquote, that's some kind of major problem.
Totally. Totally.
So it's there's a lot of whorephobia in that representation.
Yeah.
Samantha actually has a pretty good view of it, which is not surprising. She was always the best character.
She was the best. Let's be real. We all
Yeah.
pretended like we wanted to be Samantha, right?
Everyone wants to be a Samantha. Everyone does.
Yeah.
Because why would you want to be the other one?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But
Why don't we start off with Sex and the City? Because
yeah.
that's like probably the oldest one in the 4 media depiction that we're gonna be
Yes.
talking about. And it was also a different time. It was a very different time, like back in the 90s. So
Yeah. And if you look at the new show, they've done a
oh my
lot of
god.
work in the not always good work, but a lot of work in the writing to try and be like, we're correcting the errors of our ways.
Oh my god.
Which it's at least good to see them try.
Yeah, it's good to see them try. I have opinions. Let's start in the beginning. Let's start with older Sex in the City, seasons 1 through 6, maybe going through the movies or something. But as you mentioned, you were already kind of lightly talking about it. But it was a sign of the times, and I think that's important to mention as well because it it was a different time back then, even though it wasn't that long ago. That was like maybe 30 years ago or so, 30-ish years ago. But a lot has changed. I will offer a couple points. I know you will have lots more to say, but I feel like back in the 90s, sex work was very much taboo and something for folks to be ashamed of. It was almost like a don't ask, don't tell. This is something that you do. It is and was something that you don't take pride upon. And that was reflected in the movies. And at least from what I remember, like sex workers were never seen as respectful human beings or people that didn't respect themselves, and they would maybe participate in alcoholism and substance abuse and all these negative stereotypes which still ring true to this day, unfortunately, and have seeped into society as well. But what's your take on that too, in terms of like talking about fictional representation, fictional media representation of sex workers like back during that era?
Yeah, it's all very stereotypical, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All of the representations are either a high volume outdoor worker, who's also often depicted as black. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's either someone who has been exploited into it and feels deep shame, or someone who is just like a shameless hedonist, and usually a villain. Um, and then the other end of the spectrum is the low volume indoor worker, who is like usually white and from the upper middle class. Um, and there's no in between, there's no nuance to the situation. It's either survival, like near poverty work, or it's a beautiful model living a lavish lifestyle. And that's the only representation you get back then. Um, and also, everyone's end goal has to be to leave.
Right. Yeah. Everyone's angle is to leave. That is a really good point to make. Also goes along with like saviorism too.
Yes.
That really, really goes hand in hand, and the whole like I mean, when you see like trafficking campaigns and stuff too, it's always like they need to be saved and everyone is trafficked and exploited and
Yeah.
stuff too.
When
It's
frequently when they have these trafficking busts, not a single client is going to jail, but a lot of sex workers are.
right, which is super, super backwards to
Yep.
me. Super, ugh, it is not great.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, with this kind of framework in mind, and bringing this into light, because I think it's important to, when you're analyzing media, you kind of have to have that kind of context and understand the time that was made, the culture around that time as well. Um, so bringing this back into like Sex and the City, and you were already kind of mentioning how it was like before. And I mean, back in the day, I feel like uh, you wouldn't turn the other way. Like that was very much normalized back in the day, and our attitudes towards sex workers were that they were negative. But going throughout the seasons of Sex and the City and see like the movies and going on to the latest iterations of and I think it's called And Just Like That. It was
Yeah, it is.
did you wanna go into the newer version of it now too?
Yeah, well, there's not it's not like perfect. It's not a perfect comparison because they haven't really done anything about sex work in the new
The new
show.
one. Yeah.
Um, but I do think that the way Sex and the City views sex work is very tied into the way that it views sex in general.
Mhm.
In that, in the original show, Samantha was the only one of them with an actually like liberal view of sex. Like
Yeah,
the other girls were shaming her for being a slut all the time,
totally.
and Carrie was, so into being a sexually liberated young woman who writes a column about it. But, you know, if like any kind of thing they brought up that wasn't vanilla sex once a week was something like terrible and shameful.
Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting to go back and watch it and realize how actually prudish of a show it is. And
Mhm.
I think the new show is doing a bit better of a job with that.
A little bit. It's more woke. Like I feel like
Yeah.
like Sex in the
Sometimes in a bad
City,
way.
it's sometimes in a bad way. Yes, I agree. I have thoughts about that too. I mean, like myself, like as a teenager watching Sex and the City, it was like something like I idolized. I'm like, I love this show. And then like I'm in my 30s now and rewatching it again to be like, oh my gosh, like why are we trying to put Carrie on a pedestal here when she's like in this completely toxic relationship with Big, and like why
Yeah.
are we trying to champion that? It's so terrible.
Yeah. And the show's supposed to be about, female friendship, and she's a terrible
Mhm.
friend. She chooses
I
Big over her
know.
friends all the time. It's just
Which
no
is
good.
super frustrating. It's no good. I mean, I like I still like to watch it if it's on. It's like, okay, let's just like partake in it. But
Yeah.
the new one I couldn't really sit through. I think I watched a few episodes and it was like it was too woke for me. Like they were trying so hard
Yeah.
to freaking cover everything in there, and then like I don't know, there's so many uncharacteristic things that I just don't think would have happened in the original show, and I'm like, this is weird.
Yeah, it's the writing is really not great. And from what I knew of the first season, at least, um, three of the writers who wrote the last few seasons of Sex and the City, which people didn't love on average, three of those writers wrote the majority of the episodes of the first season of And Just Like That. So how are you
Oh.
supposed to update something if you're not updating the creative staff on it, right?
Right. That's a good point to make for sure. Yeah. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode on Sex in the City, Katarina. Keep
We
telling it
both
fired
have
up.
thoughts.
We both have thoughts. I mean, moving along with this too, you also wrote about, I'm like trying to go in chronological order here. I guess, is the Menu next or is White Lotus next? Maybe it's
I
White Lotus.
I think, yeah, I think
Or-
they came out in the same year, so
yeah,
I couldn't say to be sure, but I did have very different opinions uh about those two
sure.
shows.
Yeah, whichever one you want
Um
to go into first.
yeah, I found the menu's representation to be very good actually.
Me too.
Um I like that so there is an escort who's the main character, but it's
Yes.
not the topic of the movie, it's
Right.
not like the most important aspect of her character or anything.
Hmm.
Um, but it is also, you know, her job skills that really get her through the film.
Yes.
And I love anything that reverses the trope of it's always a sex worker that dies.
Yes, I was just gonna bring that up. Oh my gosh, we're on the same page.
It's a complete flip flop. She's the only one that lives, and I love that so much. Um, and yeah, just the fact that she's like represented as a real person, and I also liked how clear the film was in saying that like sex workers to some extent are service workers,
Oh yeah.
but service workers who masquerade as the people that they are serving.
Right.
um,
That's a really
and
interesting approach.
yeah, and the chef constantly needing her to choose like between the upper class that she's pretending to be and the service workers that she is maybe more like actually
Hmm.
is I thought that was very cool, very interesting.
Yeah, it's very clever. I was very entertained when the menu came out for a number of reasons. First of all, I thought it was cleverly written. I love like a dark comedy like that
Yeah.
too. Anya Taylor-Joy is a fantastic actress, and plus you weave all the food porn that's in there too. So it's just
Ugh,
like, oh my gosh, I
the
love this.
burger,
Yeah, so good.
my
But it was
mouth
like
was
funny.
watering.
Oh my gosh, I was like, I could use one of those right now.
I was glad it was the end of the movie because then I went and got a burger.
I'm sure a lot of people did after the movie concluded.
Yeah.
But it was kind of funny too to also see like the very, very different stereotypes in terms of people that go into these restaurants. And as a sugar baby, I went to a lot of those restaurants as well, but also because I am a food nerd myself. So it's like, okay, this is great. But I mean, that is, it can be a very, very accurate portrayal of just a glimpse of some of the stuff that we do for our work. And a lot of our work as escorts is basically companionship
Yeah.
at the end of the day. A lot of it is companionship. I think if I can recall in the movie, look at the guy that was her date. Like, I think obviously for a lot of it's like Michelin-esque star type of reservations, you have to prepay and you can't cancel or whatever. Or
Yeah.
you have to buy the ticket in advance and it's like the price of the whole meal. So he had to find like a replacement date to go with,
Yeah.
which is how she had found herself in that situation, which, can also be a reality for us as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely been on dates where someone like wanted to try a restaurant and just needed someone to go with.
Hells
Um
yeah. The best dates.
and yeah, I think a lot of people have this conception that like sugar babies, because they're, like dating, get taken out to like nice restaurants and nice things all the time. But I find that happens to me more now actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like I mean that was definitely ring true for me because I was the one choosing the restaurants. I'm like, let's
Yeah.
go to all the places I can afford as a person that just graduated university.
Yes. Which is nice.
Yeah, which is definitely really really nice. So it was really cool to see that and really have a humanistic approach, as you'd mentioned, uh, to her character in the film without it parading around the fact like, oh, she's a sex worker, and that not being the focus. It was really nice to just have her playing a character, and that just happened to be her character was that she was a sex worker,
Right.
and not much more attention on that. It was really, I don't know, I guess refreshing in a
Yeah.
way. You know what I
It's
mean?
it was treated like any other job, really. Like, it is a part of your character to some extent, but it's not the primary focus of who you are as a person.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And that's another great point to make as well, because our jobs, or maybe I'm just speaking from my personal experience, but our jobs, like, it's not what defines me.
Yeah.
Um, and unfortunately, I don't know, like, about your experience, but sometimes, like, when I'm meeting people for the first time and it comes up in conversation, it's not like I'm like parading, hey, like I'm a sex worker and I do this, and it's for work. But like if it naturally comes up in conversation, I'm not one to hide what I do and I'm pretty open and out about it. But usually when that does come out in conversation, that's like the only thing that people will hear and will focus on. And
Yeah.
then you just kind of get slapped on with that label, which I find really exhausting and infuriating sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I do to some extent consider myself lucky because, like, I live in Brooklyn. If you mention in Brooklyn you're a sex worker, no one really bats an eye.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get, like, names screamed in my face in most circumstances, which I
Hmm.
think in a lot of places is a concern.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but yeah, even in Brooklyn, where you've probably everyone in Brooklyn knows someone with an OnlyFans or something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally.
But I'm usually the first, in-person worker that someone's met, and they do have questions. And the questions
Don't
tend
they
to kind
all?
of take over the yeah, tend to kind of take over the conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and I've gotten pretty good at steering it around and taking control of it and not letting it kind of settle there for the rest of the time that we're talking.
Mhm.
Um, but it does get tiresome to answer the same questions over and over again.
Yeah.
When maybe from now on I'll just send them this episode of this podcast.
Here you go. Well, sometimes it's just easier that way. 'Cause I'm like, here's my link tree. You can find out all the information online if you really, really want to. Like,
Right.
it's really exhausting, and sometimes like a lot of the questions can be really invasive.
Mhm.
Like, or people like sensationalize it in terms of like, oh, what was the craziest thing that happened to you, and like trying to like
Yeah.
relive some kind of trauma. And I'm like, I don't want to go into that with you, a
Right.
stranger. Like, I don't.
Yeah. Like, people are far too comfortable asking, if bad things have happened to me on the job. And I'm
Yes.
like, "Well, have bad things happened to you at your job?"
Yeah,
Is that a normal question to ask people off the bat?
I know. Well, that's another thing too, because like again, because the nature of our work, or like how people view our work is so far away. It's so dehumanized that
Mhm.
people just have a blatant disregard for sex workers and they don't view us as people. So they feel these questions are completely normal
Yeah.
to ask us.
Or they're so fascinated by suddenly having an actual human person in front of them who
That too.
does this thing that has simply been a concept in their mind their whole life.
Yeah. I hate those people. It's a lot of that.
Yes, it is.
Sorry, going back to the menu. I told you there'd be tangents. But
Yes.
it's all in topic though. It's all in topic. It's
Yeah,
all
yeah,
related.
we're on topic. We're doing great.
But yeah, I mean, other than that, like from what I'm hearing from you, and also like my own opinion too, I feel that the menu was well done overall as a film, but also in the representation of sex workers, it was just again, as I've mentioned, refreshing to see.
Yeah.
So, and you would probably say the same too.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if outside of the sex work representation, I did like it. I do have some storytelling notes.
Oh,
which
please
I
share.
which I usually do. Um
Yes.
I I just think it could have used I want some more backstory as to how he actually got to this place and how he got this entire kitchen of people to
Mm-hmm.
follow, you know, his whole cult of personality. This like
Yeah.
this end game to it, I find to be an interesting psychological play, but I'm really more
Mm-hmm.
interested in how it got here.
Mm. Yeah, that would have been interesting. Maybe they need to make a prequel.
Yes, I would be interested in that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting too, because like as a person that actually loves and follows a lot of chefs and their journeys too, it would be kind of fascinating to see how one person has gotten there, how that person has built up their reputation, how they built this amazingly crazy restaurant on an island. Like,
Right. And
it's
like, you know,
nuts.
how psychologically he got to this place, cuz you know, a lot of people are victims of capitalism,
Hmm.
but we don't all trap our enemies in a restaurant and burn them to a crisp. So,
And kill them. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry for the spoiler, everyone. The movie's been out long enough. You guys,
Yeah,
most
I
of you guys have seen
figure I figure we're
it.
fine.
Yeah, definitely. What other notes do you have on menu?
Um I think mostly that the characters I do think could use some more definition, especially the kitchen staff who like there's really nothing personal about them at all
No.
in the movie. So I'm just wondering who they are and how they got to this place and how, you know, like we understand chef's motivations, but what are theirs?
Hmm. Yeah, they're almost like an afterthought,
Yeah.
I would say,
And I
like filler.
the actress who plays his like second in command is so phenomenal. I would have liked to see her have, you know, like a bit more of a real character to be playing.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point too. Yeah, no, I never thought about it that way, but no, I'll have to rewatch it after that too. After this conversation, refresh the memory. But yes, she was phenomenal for sure.
Yes. Yeah, I did watch it a couple times to really get my analysis down, but
Totally, and it was that good anyways, so
yeah.
doesn't
So
hurt to
I
rewatch.
did not mind rewatching it.
I guess maybe moving on to, I guess, White Lotus, as you mentioned, like came out around the same time. And I guess in terms of sex work, we'd probably be speaking specifically to season 2
Yes.
of White Lotus. Yeah, yeah. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah. There were things about the representation in White Lotus that I didn't mind. I like that their friendship is the most important thing to them. Um which it I feel like often sex workers are represented as very competitive and catty
Yes.
in the
Yes.
media. And so seeing any kind of friendship between sex workers portrayed, I think is just good to see. Um and I like how they actually used uh the other characters savior complex against them by like pretending that they're being
Oh, yes.
exploited by this pimp.
Yes.
Um
That was smart.
which yeah, it is. Um but there were some things like even though the friendship between the two girls, one of whom is more of a traditional sex worker and the other who is just kind of brought into it by her friend.
Yeah.
Um although that is a focus of the show, if you actually look at all of the scenes that they're in almost every single one of them, they are discussing sex work, discussing men, and not really having any conversations about themselves and like their friendship and anything outside of the realm of men and sex work. Um, which, so it is good to see a friendship between two sex workers, but if their entire friendship is about sex work, then
It's a bit hollow.
yeah, you know, is showing actually a good friendship, because it seems that it's mostly about sex work.
Yeah, like a
And
working friendship that's only focused on that.
right, which is not necessarily a real or great
Realistic.
friendship.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Um and I I also do think that in the end, Lucia, who's the more traditional sex
Sex
worker,
worker.
she does scam this
Yes.
this kid, this young guy who is, depicted to be like a nice, good character, like kind of like a good little, a good fella.
Yeah.
Um, and it is portrayed as if I don't think that she is necessarily portrayed well for it. And I think it
Mm.
is kind of tied into like inherently the fact that she is a sex worker, that like this is just like the kind of people who do that, or what happens when you do this job for too long is like these are where your moral boundaries lie.
Mm. That's a really interesting take. Um, I have thoughts about that too, because I mean, I'll comment on other things too, because you've said so many great statements here too, which I'm super excited about. Talking about the camaraderie aspect, yes, I agree with you. It's so nice to see that. It's like really great because I don't know about you, but like the community and the camaraderie that we have in our community is like probably the thing that always like keeps me here, is
Yeah.
because the community is so damn great and I have the
Yes.
best colleagues in the world. So it's like so nice to see that. But as you'd mentioned, yes, it was kind of like hollow on that, because like I am not talking about work all the time with my friends.
Right.
Like it's nice to bond on that too, but we have lives that are outside of the work that it is
Yes.
what we do, right? So I also have to agree with you on that. Coming up on that last point you mentioned about, yes, at the end she scams him. Again, it's going back into that, oh, here we go, like sex workers are scammers. It's another hustlers kind of ending kind of thing
Right.
to the show. And like I will say, and maybe this is just my own personal observations that I've personally seen here in Vancouver. Um, but I don't exactly remember how old these characters were in the show, but I do see and witness a lot of that kind of behavior with younger sex workers,
Yeah.
at least in dancing and at least in some like escorting as well, the friends that I did know like way back in the day. But and almost like in a braggy kind of way, similar to what was being displayed. So for myself, there was a bit of truth in that. I wish they didn't have to lean in on that, because there's so many other different ways to end on the show, but also like it's Hollywood. But at the same time, it's just like, do we also have to portray the sex workers as people that want to scam you out of your money all the time? Like it's
Right.
tiresome.
It really is. This is kind of tough a tough bit of the conversation, because when representation has historically been so bad of sex workers, if you have sex work in your show, I think having good representation is very important. But it's very hard to do real representation if you only have one sex worker in your show, because there's, such a breadth of sex workers, just like there's such a breadth of people. So it's it's hard to tell people, like you can't portray a sex worker as a negative character. But I do think that you have to look at it in a greater cultural context, and say that, when this has been the way sex workers have traditionally been portrayed, and that that is a bad portrayal and not the entirety of the community, I do think that you have a responsibility to some extent to treat it well and clarify, like, this is not inherent to sex work. This is not all sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that can be hard to work into something, but being a writer is hard.
I can imagine, and I don't know anything about the writing world or even for TV writing. I don't know, and I don't know anything about that stuff. So, so it can be tricky because I know like, and I don't know how much these producers and directors bring on consultants. Like I know some folks, like I know like for Hustlers they had consulted with Jack the stripper
Yeah.
and some other folks and people in the pole dancing and the stripping world. And I myself have been consulted for a pilot before. But I don't know like how much of these shows, like I would hope that they would hire some kind of expert or consultant on the show to show what is realistic. But at the end of the day, it's kind of up to the director and their vision and what's going to appeal to the masses and what's going to sell, which sucks sometimes.
Yeah. And I think sex work also is a thing that people often think they know about or understand
They
when
think they know.
they think they know. But they don't actually really. So a lot of people I don't think would think to hire a consultant. And I also tend to think that like when Hustlers something like Hustlers advertises quite publicly that they hired these consultants, well then the things about sex work that aren't advertising that they hired consultants, I think may not have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I wish I can re-review that Hustlers episode because that was like season 1, episode 6. And I was like, I have different opinions on that now.
Yeah.
Back in the day. I mean, do you have any storytelling notes for season 2 of White Lotus as well? Or
Oh, I mean, my opinion at the end of White Lotus was that the director is far more concerned with aesthetics than
mm-hmm.
any kind of storytelling sense. It
Right.
like the sex workers were very one note in it, but so was every character. So to some extent, I was like, I don't think it's good representation, but I also just think that is kind of inherent to the writing that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. Um, I thought that the performances of White Lotus were very good.
Mm-hmm.
The aesthetics were gorgeous. You know, the
Beautiful.
cinematography was stunning. But
Yes.
I think the characters and the plot needed some work to really feel developed and cohesive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, well, season 3 is in the works. Everyone stay tuned. So this is not
Yeah.
sponsored by White Lotus, but I'm excited.
I can't wait to see the cast. The cast
I
is always.
know. I'm stoked. Like, I think the theme for the season 3 is gonna be like religion, and they're supposed to base it out in Thailand or something. So I'm like, oh, I can't
Ooh.
wait. And like,
Oh,
which
some of
Four Seasons
those.
hotel are they gonna shoot at this?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
And
here
some
with
of those
hotel
temples in
porn.
Thailand are gorgeous. They're going to do
Gorgeous.
great things with that cinematography.
Yeah, I can't wait whenever that's gonna come out. So
Yeah.
I mean, going on to the last film, and this one I hadn't seen yet, but that's okay. You can spoil things for me if need be. I've heard only but good things on Twitter, especially about Poor Things. So
Yes.
please go off.
I loved Poor Things. I saw it 3 times in theaters and it got better every time, which that never happens. Movies
Right?
always get worse the more times you
Yes.
see them. But I did not going into it. I didn't know that there was going to be any representation of sex work. And when sex work shows up in something unexpectedly, I am always on edge
Yeah. Like, is
because
this gonna be good?
more likely than not, it's gonna be bad, and then I'm gonna not like the piece of media I was just enjoying, and it's troublesome. But
Yes.
this one I I thought was fantastic. It wasn't most of the film. It was a relatively small section. Um but Poor Things is a lot about female sexuality and uh how men in society and also individual men try to control the sexuality of women, when and where women are allowed to be sexual, how they are permitted to use their sexuality to their benefit. And it just used sex work as, one more way of explicating that, because um it really is like the the one place a man does not have control in independent sex work. Um, and the fact that men do so much trying to control women's sexuality in their personal relationships, um, I think extends to sex work as well, because suddenly this woman is allowed to benefit from her sexuality
Right. Right.
when to a lot of men, women's sexuality is simply something to be controlled.
Right. Yeah, that's a really, really good point to make. Can you tell the audience, maybe, and also me too, like what the because I hadn't seen it yet, but like how was sex work portrayed in this film?
Um, so it is just to kind of set the stage. It's kind of a steampunk world, like a late 1800s kind of time period, um, but with a mad scientist who has created this Frankenstein type being that is Emma Stone. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so
okay.
it's
Sorry.
kind of
Yes.
kind of a Frankenstein, um, but with very different themes. um, and she goes off on this adventure with the man that she is with, and they end up in Paris with no money. And she says, "Okay, well, I will find a way to make us money," and happens upon a brothel and is offered, a trial gig, a trial run, and um, takes it and makes some money and goes back to the guy she was with, proud to have made the money. And he calls her names and screams at her on the street. And this is when she finally splits off from him and goes back
Yeah.
to the brothel and works there for a time. Um, and uh, it's not glamorized, certainly, which I think is also often an issue
Good.
in portrayal of sex work, is that, it's
Yes.
either something negative and horrifying and traumatizing, or it's like this wonderful glamorous life that you get to
Right.
lead with zero consequences.
Right.
And this is portrayed as a job, and it shows several of her days on the job and the ups and downs. It very much shows her friendship and relationship with a co-sex worker, which, as someone who is also dating a co-sex worker, that was lovely to see on screen.
Oh, cool.
Um, and later on, when she's talking to the man who wants to marry her, she asks if it challenges his, male desire for ownership. Um,
Mm.
and uh, talks about it as, something she's not ashamed of, something she did that she, you know, got tired of and didn't want to do anymore, but that served her well at that time and that she doesn't have regrets about. And
That's
she never goes
awesome.
back on that. She never like grows shame about it. Um and it's the whole story, since she's kind of a creation, is about like someone experiencing society and sexism and herself and her body for, the first time as a completely unsocialized adult.
Mm,
So I think
wow.
it's to some extent kind of saying, without having been socialized, to think that it is morally bankrupt to be a sex worker, people wouldn't have a problem with it.
Totally. Wow. This sounds awesome. This sounds like something I really need to watch as
It's
some
great.
homework. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no wonder people have so many great things to say about it. It sounds really great with messaging too.
Yeah.
Wow. Super cool. So overall, like thoughts on Poor Things sounds like it was well received from the sex work
Yes.
front. Yes.
Yeah. And from society, it seems Emma Stone has
Mhm.
won some awards for it.
Yes. That's correct.
So seems to be kind of an awards darling. And to see something like that be popular with the masses, but also popular with critiques of art, and not just, you know, critiques of sex work representation in art, um, is really cool. And I think it is part of a growing trend that is seeing a lot of much better representation and, just social opinion toward sex work and sex workers and kind of our place in society.
Wow. Yeah, no, totally. And I'm glad that's actually a really natural transition too to talk about, the impact that the media can have on society, whether it is good or bad, but also like talking about kind of like earlier in our conversation, talking about um sex work representation over the time. So we began this episode talking about like sex work in like the late 80s, like early 90s, and how those attitudes have, potentially shifted. I think have mostly shifted in general over now into the 2020s. Um, and how hopefully, again, mostly progressive, I would say, attitudes towards sex work. And you can kind of see that with um, the normalization of and I say normalization, but like how like say like the word OnlyFans is a pretty like normal thing. And even as you mentioned, like, oh, like everyone knows someone that has like an OnlyFans, or everyone knows someone that is like a sex worker too. So
Yeah.
like it's really revealing how those attitudes have shifted over time. I'd love to hear like your opinion on that perspective as well, Katarina.
Yeah. So I with media representation in general, it is kind of a chicken or the egg situation.
Uh-huh.
Does the media representation um reflect or impact, societal
Society.
opinion of things? And it's
Right.
really just, it goes both ways. But
Totally.
I do think something that's been happening in more the modern era is very interesting, is this kind of um focus on, quote unquote wokeness, and the fact that we're all being recorded so much of the day and putting so many of our thoughts on the internet, on social media, and all these different platforms. And I do think that kind of that can have a negative impact up a negative impact on us in a lot of ways.
Mm. Okay,
But
yeah, for sure.
I think it also has improved representation in media of a lot of things, because the people who make this media don't want people to look back in 20 years and be like, oh, this is, backwards, like this is wrong. Um, so I do think that like people have gotten more careful about the way they represent certain topics in media. Um, I remember when I started watching stand-up specials and stuff, I noticed before a certain year, every stand-up special had a joke about sex workers and a joke about trans people.
Yes. Yeah.
And the joke was just, they exist.
Or it's
Isn't
like
that
ha ha ha
crazy?
hookers. Yeah,
Right.
right.
and there's never any actual joke behind it, right? It's just our existence in general is a
It's a
joke.
joke, right?
And you don't see that so much these days.
Yeah, that is very true.
And I think the fact that, it's so much easier to see people's immediate reactions to things online and see differing opinions from yours, and also know that what you're making is going to be online forever and people will dig it up later. I think that is impacting the way people talk about a lot of topics online and in media, recorded media of various types. And I think it's had a positive influence in the way people talk about sex work.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that is a real like permanent shift, and that people are being more inclusive rather than people are avoiding those kind of jokes in fear of it might like retaliate on them later on. Like I'm more hopeful
Yeah.
that it is a good thing with attitudes shifting.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that even just to see the jokes stop happening is a good thing, even if
Yes.
people's reasoning is bad. But I do also think that certain things on the internet, like, OnlyFans, um, does kind of put it out into the public eye a bit more and brings the conversation up more. So it's not
Yes.
just, people seeing the only exposure people have to sex work is seeing these terrible representations in media. Now it's available to us in a lot of different forms across a lot of different platforms, and it does bring up certain pitfalls like internalized whorephobia, like people who only do online work, really looking down on people who do
Right.
in-person work. Um,
Yes, the hierarchy.
the hierarchy.
Yes.
But that it also brings that conversation up. It brings it into the limelight in a certain way that I think it being discussed and it being a part of the everyday discourse really does normalize it in a positive way.
Yeah. Yes. I was just going to say the same thing. We are on the same page with that. Yeah, definitely normalizes it for sure. And I'm really hoping that this trend will continue, so that it will be a more wider acceptance of sex work as a chosen career profession in the future. So I'm really hoping that that will just continue, and we will one day just, we will just be seen as, oh yeah, she's a sex work for work, and then we move on to the next conversation, and it's just gravy.
Yeah. Yeah.
After that.
I
That's the
mean,
goal.
I am glad to not be living in an era where it comes up and you get screamed at in a lot of conversations, but there's definitely ways people can improve.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I mean, and I think that is such a great way to kind of end the conversation today, to kind of wrap it all up. Unless you have a few more things to say as well, Katarina. Oh my god. Well, I mean, there is a few more things you have to say. Before we let you go, where can we all find you?
So I am at katarinaquinn.com. You can find me on Twitter at Katarina_Quinn, or X, I guess it is these days.
Right.
I decided to dead name Twitter a while ago.
Twitter is
Um,
like, I have thoughts about that lately
it,
too. But
it's
anyways,
in the dictionary, so
yes, right? It's a thing.
I trust the dictionary.
Me too.
Yeah, and you can always look out for media reviews on petitmort.com. Yeah.
Yeah. That's all the things. And all those links are available in the show notes if you haven't clicked on there already. As for everyone else listening at home, it's new episodes every single Sunday, dropping at on Sundays at midnight Pacific Standard Time. If you want to get in touch with me, you can easily do that also on Twitter/X. It's stripped by Sia. On Instagram, Stripped by Sia Podcast. We also have my website as well if you want to pitch yourself to be on the show. It is strippedbysia.com. Just click on the contact form and you can go fill in the form there with your pitch. I'm excited to read all of yours. I don't always make it, but I'm happy to work with people and develop an episode together with you. And patreon.com/strippedbysia if you want to support the show financially. All the funds, I don't know if I said it earlier, but all the funds help go towards hosting my website and adult industry related events. But yeah, Katarina, it was lovely having you on the show today. This is such a great conversation to have. I'm really glad that we're able to talk about this. And I really need to go watch Poor Things after this.
Yes, you do. And yes, also had such a great chat. It's, I think, always important to talk about the way people perceive things.
For sure, absolutely. And everyone go give Katarina a like, a follow, and all the things there. And yeah, we'll see everyone in for another episode next Sunday. Thank you so much for joining us today, Katarina.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You're listening to Stripped by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia, music by Ted D, graphic design by Maria Bellandarama, and photography by Ian Davern.